every single day this week, even when they haven't been open, because we've had a very busy series of dinners and engagements, bringing together the joy of food and wine, great winemakers, the produce they deliver, and then the food which Chef Ransley Peterson and his team pair up and create a symphony that has been thoroughly enjoyed. Better. And whether that company is friends, its place, its food, or ideally a combination of all of those, you bring the best out of any possible bottle. There is no bottle of wine that doesn't benefit from being shared with other people or had with great food or being drunk somewhere special. And that somewhere special is the Old Oak at Royal Johannesburg. And that's where I find myself this evening. Now, I'm sort of on my own for the next little while because my star guest this evening has discovered that the traffic in Johannesburg is a little more severe than the traffic around the Hartenberg estate. It's not just tractors and old school Peugeots you have to look out for. And so Carl Schultz, 30 years a winemaker at Hartenberg and a veteran member of the Cape Winemakers Guild, 27 years he has been a member now, is on his way. And that's important not just because he's a terrific winemaker and a wonderful raconteur, but also because it is National Shiraz Day tomorrow. So tomorrow you need to get up and with your Rice Krispies, pour yourself a glass of Shiraz and get all day off to a perfect start. But I'm not entirely on my own because in just a moment I will be joined by my dear friend Ransley Peterson, whose status as a chef is soaring and soaring and soaring. It's almost at the point where I have to call his agent instead of him. But while I can still get hold of him directly, I've roped him in. And that's important because later on in the show, when Carl has joined us, we will be pairing some food from Ransley's kitchen with some of the wine from Hartenberg and getting a sense of what really brings the best out of Syrah/Shiraz. And I think you might be a little surprised by one or two of the dishes that Chef Ransley has conjured up. So Ransley Peterson with me in just a moment. Shortly thereafter, Carl Schultz, the winemaker at Hartenberg. First of all, though, here's some of your latest wine news. All right, here are some tastings coming up. Next Wednesday, your chance to be in Four Ways and to be with the team from Waterford because they're going to be touching down at the Norman Goodfellows store in Four Ways and presenting some exceptional wine from their new offerings. And your chance to come along, taste them, do so in tandem with some terrific food and enjoy the combination thereof. Very simple to come along. Just jump on to the Norman Goodfellows website. Confirm that you'd like to come along, make your payment. I think it's just 100 rand to come along, and all of that goes to charity, and you'll then get a really good evening. It's educational, it's entertaining, and it is full of good food and wine. So put that one in the diary. So that is next Wednesday. That would be the 2nd of August, the 1st of August. There's also one with Carmen Stevens to look out for. So put that one down in your diary. And that is definitely one to look out for. Also to look out for next month, the 23rd and the 30th of August, your chance to try some wine from the Cape Winemakers Guild. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that Carl Schultz is a very established and esteemed member of the Guild. It is the very best of the best, the top winemakers from across South Africa. Carl is one of them. He has many colleagues who have been doing this job and playing this role for some time now. 23rd of August in Cape Town, 30th of August in Johannesburg, your chance to go along to taste some of the Guild wine, the wine that's going to be in the auction this year, that Nedbank Cape Winemakers Guild auction. So you can try the wine. The winemakers themselves feel is something particularly special, and as a result has been put up for auction. So mark those down in the diary. Cape Town, 23 August, 30th of August in Johannesburg, and a really cool evening in both cities awaits. And then just a reminder, I did mention it a moment ago, but the Carmen Stevens tasting. Carmen has got such a cool story. She's a groundbreaking winemaker in so many ways. And it would be very easy for me to say, come along, here's a black woman winemaker, come and support her. It's a great story, certainly, but that's not why I'm telling you to come along. I'm telling you to come along because she's a really talented winemaker who is delivering some exceptional wine. So put that one in the diary next Monday. So 2 from 2. Monday is Carmen Stevens and Wednesday is Waterford. There we go. They do an excellent glass of vodka here at the Old Oak. Let me drag in the chef. Come and join me, chef, in your... what is it? Let me ask you something before we do the formalities. And isn't it lovely to see you and say nice things about your food? What is it about chefs and Crocs and Birkenstocks? You've got across South Africa, look at David Higgs as a good example. People who are devastatingly good chefs with the most awful taste in footwear. What is this obsession with these shoes, Ransley?
Dan, I have to be honest with you. Like, when I walked in the kitchen the first time, I'd much prefer to wear All Stars, but you learn very quickly that those floors are slippery. And, Birkenstocks have been an old faithful, and you kind of... it's become a status symbol now in any kitchen. The exec chef is, or the main chef, so top dogs on the line when you see who's wearing Birkenstocks. So I wouldn't say that I fit into the crowd, but it's definitely saved my life a couple of times, and by far the most expensive shoes I own and the most comfy.
Like, I've seen enough chefs, and in fairness, I wore them myself for a year or so with my damaged foot. Welcome to the show. Lovely to have you back, and a warm-up for Carl, who is on his way, and who has provided your challenge today, which we'll talk about in a second, pairing up food. Exactly what you've done, we'll find out later on the show. I do want to talk to you about this element, but just more broadly speaking, it's an interesting challenge, I feel, for a chef, because you always want to do the best you can, show off the food as well as possible. But when you're creating a wine tasting menu, it's got to be wine that doesn't overpower the food. It's got to be food that doesn't overpower the wine. Do you sometimes have to hold yourself back a touch?
In the beginning, then, I'll be honest with you, I've had to hold myself back quite a few times. But I think, being more exposed to food and wine dinners and how they all played out before, it was kind of a struggle. And I made a point of always going back to the person that I was pairing with and listen, what did you think here? What did you think there? Did I miss the mark? And, over time you develop this kind of eye for, if I have a Shiraz, look out for vintage, look out for region, and you kind of you have a pinpoint of where to go with your food and your menu. But obviously, I've spent a lot of time with you, and I'm blessed of having Ruan around, and we drink wine, sometimes wine that we can't afford. And a part of getting copious amounts of wine in through your system, I think, for me, I try and sit in a tasting whenever a winemaker visits. And as I'm tasting that wine, I kind of throw out ideas. And I've had this nonchalant, don't care attitude of, if I get it wrong, cool, like, let's cook up something and let's see. I think the standout ones that I've done was with Dirk Coetzee from Lavinia, and he had his single block Chenin on the table, and I left him for half an hour. I came back with a 11 out of 12 marble score Wagyu, and he said to me, we're not on Pinotage yet. And I said, listen, this is for the Chenin. And contrary to what we had discussed, I kind of pieced together, if you over caramelize and you add a little bit of citrus in there, it kind of leans back to old vine Chenin, that malolactic fermentation from the oak on your mid palate. Kind of, it all has to come together in harmony at the end. We're not competing with winemakers, they're not competing with us. It's a place where great memories are built, and I think that's what we ultimately trying to achieve.
So if we distill that down to people who are watching at home at the moment, they're not superstar chefs like yourself. They don't have a team of 35 doing all the work for them in the kitchen. They've got to create their own food with their own wine. What are some of the rules that should be broken? What are some of the discoveries that you've made in the last year here at the Old Oak, where people at home are thinking, oh, you can't possibly have that food without wine, but actually they can work out really nicely?
So I think the main thing about pairing food and wine is obviously the education. You have to expose yourself to what you normally wouldn't do. Go out there, buy different bottles of wine. If you only drink Haute Cabriolet, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, is where I started my wine journey. And that was an old faithful. It never changed. But you have to expose yourself to different flavors. If you pick up a Sauvignon Blanc and I tell you, you're going to pick up tropical flavors of mango from Costa Rica or from Jamaican Islands, if you've never smelled the mango or tasted the mango from there, you don't know what I'm talking about. It's exposing yourself to different flavors, different elements. And I think walking through a supermarket, when you get to the veg and fruit section, pick up the fruit, smell them, invest yourself into what you're putting into your body. And I think that's super important. There's no rule of thumb, as I think you figured when we do tastings together. It's kind of, I believe this will change your mind, and I give you kind of like a buzz button. It's going to change your mind for the next 15 minutes, and you're going to listen to whatever I say. But it's about posing the question, and I find that extremely challenging and at the same time extremely rewarding.
What about inverting the point of departure? Because we go to a restaurant, or we're having dinner at home. Right, this is what I've cooked. What sort of wine is going to go with that? When you have an evening like the one we had last night, the one we've got tonight, the one we've got tomorrow, it's a busy week. It's actually starting with the wine. You've now got to reverse engineer that process. I'm sure it's quite fun, a little challenging, but is there also a voyage of discovery to that?
As chefs, we never make massive mistakes. When you make a mistake, you kind of rediscover or stumble upon something that you've never done before. And winemakers work extremely hard. What's in that bottle is in that bottle, and it's easier to go and find a wine that will kind of match what you've cooked. What I find is, if we have a bottle of wine, it's a Shiraz. We know exactly the flavor profile of a Shiraz. Obviously, region plays a different part to what's in the bottle. And when we pick up a slight acid note here or underlying tannins that come afterwards, we kind of tweak with a little bit more lemon, a little bit more savoriness. And, like black garlic is super intense, depending on how you use it and how you incorporate it in a dish. So it's kind of, there's no specific recipe to pairing food with wine. It's how you feel in the moment. And, I might do a pairing on paper. I've tasted it, works completely well. On the day you open up the wine and you go back, I don't know if you saw last night while you were sitting in private dining room, before I send out every single dish, ask the waiter to please just pour a little bit so I can double check the flavor profile.
Yeah.
Because on the day, your mood, cooking is about feeling, wine is about feeling. And I feel like, it changes so often. You have to just double check 5 minutes before it goes out to do final tweak.
Well, I gave you a challenge today, and that was to make some food to go with the Shiraz. Carl Schultz has just joined us, so I'll let you slip away. If you can get the team to send us through some glasses and Carl's wine. He's going to join me in just a second, and a little later we'll find out what food you've come up with.
100%. Thanks, Dan.
There we go.
Awesome.
Chef Ransley Peterson, he's just really developing a wonderful reputation here at the Old Oak. We've had meals all week this week, and the collection of them, the excitement that he brings to the food he's cooking is something that I find infectious. And we'll sit down together and I'll say to him, this is the wine I'm bringing. It's vintage, or it's off the charts, or it's something I've found in a different part of the world. Tonight, for instance, we're doing a Tour de France dinner, and the food is being paired with wine from the Jura and from Sancerre and from Rioja. So it's a really exciting opportunity for him. And a little later on in the show, we'll find out exactly what wine and food pairing Ransley has come up with to match the Shiraz of one of the great masters. And I don't say that easily. This is a man who joined Hartenberg 30 years ago. Now, when you see him in a moment, you'll think, crikey, must have started when he was 11. He is now not just a 30-year veteran of Hartenberg, he's a 27-year veteran of the Cape Winemakers Guild. And amongst the myriad contributions he's made to South African wine, he's redefined our understanding of Shiraz, and he has also proved to be one of the great mentors and supporters and believers in South African wine. And that is why today is so special. You probably heard the rotor blades a moment ago. That was his helicopter landing, and he is now with us on the show, a little belatedly, but very happily. Carl Schultz, welcome.
Hello, thank you very much, Dan. Thank you.
Discovering Johannesburg is a little busier than Hartenberg.
It's a little busier than Cape Town. A little busier than Cape Town, yes.
Well, look, welcome to the show. We've got some wonderful wine we're going to be drinking in just a moment. But first of all, I need to say congratulations, because 3 decades in, 30 years at Hartenberg. If I were to have said to you as you came out of that interview 3 decades ago, do you think you'll still be here in 30 years' time? What would the answer have been?
Well, if you look at what's happened in our industry and what the status quo is, absolutely not. The average life of a winemaker is generally a decade to a decade and a half, sometimes 20 years, but 30 is a little unusual. But I think it's a combination of an awesome property with great terroir, very good owners, people that love wine, they understand wine, they understand farming, and over time assembling a great team. So I think we enjoy what we do, and I guess there's a difference between living to work and working to live, and we're very much into having a balanced existence, and very happy to have developed new wines in my tenure at the estate, and hopefully one day hand it over to somebody who'll take it another notch or two up.
Now, I suspect that it is those new wines that have played a big role in allowing you to stay on, because we see a lot of winemakers, they'll do 5-10 years somewhere and then look for a new challenge. You seem to have found new challenges within your existing environment. And if I look at some of the vineyards you've got, and gee, you've got a crazy collection of terroir within one property.
Yes.
Year in, year out, there are new things to keep you excited, keep you challenged, and allow you to keep, if not reinventing, then certainly adding to this extraordinary portfolio that you run rule over.
No, absolutely. I think, and that would be my advice to anybody that serves time at a wine property, is that within the property, that one looks to innovate, that you just try and think out of the box all the time. Climatically, our environment is changing. You need to look at your product mix. But I think I've always had an inquisitive mind, love to research, love to read. And it was great to, soon after getting to Hartenberg, to develop South Africa's first single-site concept wine, the Grubble Hill, which is our premier Shiraz. And then a decade after starting in '93, just because we got to know the vineyards and because we saw opportunity to trade up as far as quality goes, to elevate the estate's image, because the estate has been there and bottling top end since the 1960s. And in all businesses, there are periods of ebb and flow. But I think '03 was important because that was the year we lost my mentor and friend and owner, Ken McKenzie. And it was an opportunity to create the Stork Shiraz, which is a tribute wine, and the maiden vintage was made in the year that he passed. So, and then other wines followed subsequently. The Eleanor preceded the Stork, the Mackenzie with the Stork, our Bordeaux blend, and very recently the Megan, which is a Southern Rhone blend. So, all good.
The Eleanor that you mentioned, it's a great name, but it's probably the surname that's slightly more important in the context of South African wine. I think the Stats South Africa report from last year was that 1 in every 3 people in the South African wine industry is somehow related to the Finlayson family. Eleanor, a matriarch not just of her own family, but of a huge sprawling family tree across South African wine, and that brings this great wine family into the Hartenberg history.
Absolutely. One has to give credit to that family. The lady that's honored on that label, Eleanor, is essentially, you could call her wine royalty. She's the matriarch of a very fine group of winemaking sons, and then grandsons and granddaughters. So produced, brought Chardonnay to Hartenberg in the early '90s, and planted 7 different clones. Our top clone is from Dijon. We called it the Reserve Chardonnay. But I think we realized that we'd like to pay tribute to Eleanor, who, along with her husband Morris, bought the farm in 1948. And we thought of no better way than perhaps Chardonnay. She was is an essential part of our history. She introduced the first Shiraz to Stellenbosch. Always a bit of a upstream, rebellious, inventive person. We had a really good chat with the two sons, Walter and Peter, asking permission for the use of their mum's name, and they were very affable and very agreeable to the idea. And so since '98, it's been the Eleanor. Yeah.
It's a proud part of this portfolio, and it's one we definitely need to drink in more detail in due course. But given that Shiraz Day is tomorrow, and I know you're leading a parliamentary plea to declare it a public holiday, which it certainly should be, we're looking at some Shiraz this evening. And I think it's important to look at Shiraz through your eyes, because if we go back to when the Carl Schultz legacy at Hartenberg began, Shiraz was in its somewhat earlier days. We now think of it as being an absolute go-to grape. But Shiraz and Stellenbosch, when you started out, it wasn't quite as established as it is now.
No, not at all. I started my career at Simmonsig in the late 80s, and I seem to remember correctly, there were 20 wine properties in Stellenbosch, of which less than one handful produced the grape. Today, I think there are over 200 in Stellenbosch. I remember my icons at the time, starting off as a young winemaker, was Jacques Borman from Lamotte, and a really important producer who is no longer producing at the property was at Liffland Estate, and Liffland pioneered the very first peppery, lighter style, let's perhaps say Rhone-styled Shiraz. His name was Abram Birkus, and I remember chatting to both of them, getting advice. I was fortunate to do a vintage in Cotreti, the region in Northern Rhone, in '97, in an effort to learn, because other than those two producers and Zandvliet and Ellis Verloren, there wasn't much to go around on. So, but things have changed dramatically since then. Today the grape is called the future red grape for South Africa by somebody no less than Tim Atkin, a very respected international wine commentator. And it makes sense, because the grape is essentially a semi-desert plant. It's very tough. It is able to survive in high water stress conditions. And if one looks where it's planted globally, it's extremely adaptable, unlike many other varieties. So it is well positioned, and I tend to agree. It'll help carry the banner for South Africa in future.
It's also one that's gone through a little bit of ebb and flow. And if I look at the Shiraz when I started drinking, and I won't say exactly when that was, through to a lot of the Shiraz I see now, and I changed those quite deliberately, because I think there's a perception as to the style of one and the style of the other, as interchangeable as certain producers may have it. We've got wines that we're seeing a lot now of elegance and precision, and there's been a little bit of a change of the interpretation. Is that more responding to what people are wanting to drink, or is that a greater understanding of the potential of terroir, the potential of the grape, and what it can be made into?
I think, you put your finger right on the pulse of what's happening with the grape. There's been a new wave with a completely different take on the variety in the last decade, and we see these very elegant, perhaps for the use of a better word, lighter styled, but textural, elegant wines. And I think when one goes in that direction, you're better able perhaps to reflect terroir. You're looking to pick a little earlier to retain some freshness in the eventual wine. They generally associated with some of the warmer areas. It makes sense just from a ripening point of view to avoid stress, that you do get off the crop earlier, and obviously then the resultant alcohols as a consequence are lower. So I think there's a place for that, and it's opened up a whole new world consumers and commentators, people who judge wine globally, have sat up and taken notice. For somebody like Hartenberg, who's perhaps considered part of the old guard, I think we watch this with interest. But as I said to somebody recently, when you've been selling this wine, for example, since the '68 vintage, is it over time as style evolves, you develop a generation of followers. You start to engage with new generations, and in a way, your path is set. And you can make the best wine in the world, but if it doesn't sell, we have a problem. So I think in our business, our industry, it's all about being able to sell. And so Hartenberg certainly sells. It helps that it's been around for decades, and I think the two single site wines that we have here today, they're single vineyard wines, single site wines. The productions are limited because of the size of what's there. I rigidly stick to the site and to the source, and but it allows one to reflect terroir. And they mirror opposites of each other. The one virtually just stone, and the other one not a pebble in sight, and lots of clay loam, beautiful soil. So
they are screaming out to be tasted. We're going to do that in a second, and do that in partnership with some food. Chef Ransley Peterson is bringing those dishes through in just a second. Tell me very quickly about the understanding of that terroir. My imagination is, well, 30 years on, you must know every stone in the place. You must be able to just have a look at it and go, right, that's the wine that's coming this year. Do these vineyards still have the capacity to take you by surprise, to teach you something each vintage, and to open up your eyes to another element or another opportunity?
Absolutely. I think most winemakers would tell one that nature is by its very nature, it is imperfect. Nothing is perfect. Every vintage will then, as a consequence, be different. They behave differently. At Hartenberg, we have in the order of about 17 different Shiraz or Syrah parcels. By now, we know more or less what to expect of them. But every few years, we have little surprises that jump out. And for that reason, it's very important that we taste blind internally, because you develop an expectation of a site, and mostly it's in the mark. But there's certain vintages where things change, and you need to keep an open mind and accept. But yes, I think if I look at a site like the Gravel Hill today, the vineyard, which is delimited by road around it, all around it, it's a square parcel of vineyard. That's picked today in 4 to 6 different picks over a 2.5 week period, which sounds really strange because it looks like a uniform block. But again, nature and soil and all the other elements aren't perfect, and they vary. And the Cape model is regarding soil is more Burgundian than Bordelais, in the sense that our soils change rapidly over short distances. You put the same variety on different soils, and you have different nuances of the grape. So I think Gravel Hill, for example, on the slope, top of a slope dries first. There's more stress. They ripen earlier. Base of slope wetter. In our case, Gravel Hill, the water through the A profile, through the stone onto pure clay, and then migrating invisibly below ground, running along the clay. And that'll, wetter soils are always later. They're cooler, so they'll be later. And then there are places where the clay comes to the surface, where there's more stress, and so on and so on. And the old expression, the more you see, the more you look, the more you see, that certainly holds true. And I think one of my great heroes has an expression which I certainly can use. It's Albert Einstein, who said, "Look deeper into nature, and you gain a better understanding of life." I can apply that to gaining a better understanding of sight. And it certainly is if you take time, the detail is there, but it takes a while to see. Yeah.
One final question on the slightly more technical side of it before we jump into the wine for which you are so rightly celebrated, and that is the change in your role as a winemaker over those 3 decades in the context of technology of changing winemaking proceedings. How much in those 30 years have things like solar planning of vineyard plantings and the understanding of water and things that we now sometimes take for granted changed in those 30 years for you?
There have been big changes. I think the advancements, especially in vineyard, and the awareness and the growing perception of terroir, and within that, the very clear evidence now that the Cape is going to not escape global warming and climate change, that the prediction for our neck of the woods would be warmer and drier. I think if I think back when I started in the 80s, it was rare to see irrigation in Stellenbosch. Mm-hmm. And if any, like I inherited at Hartenberg, you would have a few sprinkler pipes, aluminium sprinkler pipes stashed away under the eave of the store. And in certain vintages, you would have to irrigate, especially on soils that don't retain moisture, like the Grubble Hill. And then over time, that's all changed. And today, I almost couldn't imagine that one could farm anything in Stellenbosch without the guarantee in the back pocket, as it were, that when those vintages come around and you need water, that you're able to be able to look after the plant. I mean, in worst case scenario, I remember visiting Alsace a few years ago in the vintage and seeing entire parcels of vineyard brown leafed, initially thinking they were going to be removed and they'd been sprayed, but they'd died from drought. Obviously, Europe is not geared for irrigation of vineyard. It's illegal. And those lessons, they come home to roost. We went through the drought. We learned a lot of lessons about water conservation. And I think as far as the use of plant material, whether it's cover crops or undervine mulching to help reduce evaporation of water, we're exploring a completely new farming philosophy called regenerative agriculture. Hartenberg has been looking at this and applying those practices for the last 5 years, and hopefully get accreditation before the year is out. Looking to bring back the very, or rather an ancient technique of using animals in vineyard and other crops, obviously in a time when there's no leaves. That's quite important. It's exciting because the laboratory analysis, control versus test, are just Mars and Venus. And taken it further in the last 3 years, making wine separately from the lots, and we have 2 completely different products. Sequestering carbon, the source of all life, to soil is the only other way of buffering your soils against future drought and water variability if you don't have irrigation. So I think it's essential that we not just capture CO2, because we know what that means for our long-term future. We need to remove those. I think from a technological point of view, the advent of, as you mentioned, the knowledge regarding solar tracking and lining up vineyard rows, in the case of, let's say, white grapes like Chardonnay, to protect grapes against sun. I was in Bordeaux recently. We have producers spraying clay mixtures onto the grapes as a form of natural sun cream. And these are things that are all going to evolve as we I think climate change is the slow poison of our time. It's we're in that pot and it's busy warming slowly, and you don't really panic because it's not clear and it's not to be seen clearly. But I think our decades and decades of measurements of rainfall and temperature show clearly that we're on a very continuous curve. And it's best that we start to think about finding a way to adapt and meet the changes. But I think what was revolutionary in our industry in the last 2 decades is an arrival of a completely new generation of winemakers that, for the first time in our history, in a long time, were free to travel. They would work northern southern hemispheres in a 12-month period. And by the time they're 25, they have 8 vintages behind them. They also, I think, because of the ability to travel freely, I think we're exposed to a lot more out-of-the-box thinking, as it were, lots of energy, and the infusion of that young talent within an industry that was, I think, well-positioned for growth, probably has South Africa in the best position it's been in its history from a saleable package point of view. So it's exciting times. I'm certainly positive about the future. We're an industry completely independent of any support, which is unique in the Western world when you farm vineyard. And so Cape grape farmers, Cape winemakers they're independent, but they're smart enough through vehicles like the Cape Winemakers Guild to cooperate with each other, because I think they get the bigger picture. The guys we want to take down are the Aussies and the guys from New Zealand and the rest of them.
In every sense, not just one.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right. Well, let's move into some of the wine that is in this country, which has you so positive, which is really, really good to hear. I'm going to check quickly with my producer, Ronaldo. Which wine is that dish for, Ronaldo? You're not sure. All right. You dash off to the kitchen and find out. You can bring that across. And there we go. There'll be some cutlery arriving in just a moment. And we will pair this up very quickly while Ronaldo finds out for me which of these wines this is going with. Our chef has done a runner. Your broad philosophy on food and wine pairing, it's something we can get a little bit precious and precocious about. What's your general philosophy?
My philosophy is probably quite similar to which wine should one drink, which wine are people drinking, and why should they be drinking it? And as far as I'm concerned, if we make it too complicated, and in many cases it is, then you tend to alienate people. We are struggling to get emerging market and younger people to adopt the product as opposed to other drinks. And I think, firstly, you drink what you enjoy. As far as pairing goes, it's exciting because every person has a different perception of smell and taste. And I strongly recommend that there aren't hard and fast rules. I mean, we've only in the last decade or so we learned that many red wines with soft tannins, like Merlot, would actually pair really well with something like rich chocolate desserts with a mousse. I think one needs to keep an open mind, and when one's preparing, the question is just, I think, if we go to a restaurant, we generally tend to, what we should be doing is we should be selecting our meal, and then once the meal selection is made, we pair the wines. And I think when one is preparing a meal at home, to keep in mind what could work, and there's nothing better than making food and tasting wine. So I think that's the way we do it. I mean, we look at it organically, as it were. And I have a very open mind about what will work and won't work. And sometimes I'm surprised by the results. So I have a very unfettered approach to the whole business. Yes.
All right. Well, it turns out this dish is to go with the Shiraz. So let's pour some of that first up, and you can tell me a little about this particular wine. I tell you what, you're the guest, so let me pour you some 2020 Shiraz from Hartenberg, and this is one that represents a cross section of the estate.
That's correct. Yes. So this is the estate Shiraz, and when I say estate Shiraz, like all of our wines, the grapes are grown on the estate.
And that's very important because for a lot of people, rightly or wrongly, they're now bringing in grapes from different areas. You're kind of old school that way. You're very much what's on our farm is what we're making.
I think we follow a model similar to Burgundy and Bordeaux, where it's from the chateau or it's from the domain, and you play to your own strengths. The advantage of bringing in fruit is you can do many different things, but people forget that Cape soils are the oldest viticultural soils on earth. They exceed 300 million years. It's geeky, but why it's important is that soils will then change in character. And at Hartenberg has 11 different soil types. And as I mentioned earlier, if you plant this grape across a number of those, you have different products. So I think it's really important that as far as an estate goes, that if you have the wonderful gift of part of terroir being soil that's varied, and you can produce 4, 5, or 6 varieties at a high level, that's quite a unique thing. And if you look around the industry, there aren't many of the top producers that are doing that. Many of them are essentially, and it's not unkind, it's just fact, they're buying terroir. Because today, like housing, owning a home, it's become really expensive. So, and as terroir gains fame, it becomes more and more expensive. And there are lots of examples of that at the moment.
Yeah. So as we're going to try this food in a second, I think our cutlery and crockery is on its way, and we're going to find out from Chef Ransley in just a second why he's chosen this dish. Before this wine, somebody's watching now going, "Oh, it doesn't look good, but what am I getting out of it?" What for you is the characteristic? What's the calling card of this particular wine?
As you mentioned, this is an assemblage of a number of different vineyard parcels on the estate, and Hartenberg Estate Shiraz has always had on the bouquet, it has this expression of berry fruit, red and blackberry fruit. It's interesting, in the cooler vintages, more red fruit, and in the warmer, sunnier vintages, more black fruit. It is also, and they are fruits of evolution, so the riper you pick, the darker the fruit gets. But this plummy, violety, beautiful cherry character, that's very typical of the clay loam soils in Stellenbosch. There are 1 or 2 other great producers. And I almost want to say that berry fruit is a signature aromatic descriptor, as it were, of the grape in Stellenbosch.
Had I not tried what's to come hereafter, because we did some tasting yesterday, I and many others would be going, "Oh, this must be the flagship. This is lovely." It certainly is. There is more wine to come. There's also food, though. So let's have a quick look a little earlier on what Chef Ransley put together in the kitchen to pair with the Shiraz.
I've decided to do a little different pairing when it comes to the Stork, the 2019 vintage. I think with the underlying tones of prunes of the wine and the herbaceousness, what I've chosen to do is beef fillet tataki. We sous vide the beef fillet for probably 2 hours at 38 degrees, and then a slight kiss on the grill with a little bit of ponzu, homemade chimichurri that we do, a rice cracker, just to elevate the dish, add some texture in there, to tie in with the wine, and a slight hint of pepperiness with a little bit of nasturtium paste that goes on there as well.
All right, so there we go. That is Ransley's decision. We have some cutlery. The crockery will be with us in just a moment, and we'll be able to taste. So, yeah, a couple of plates headed our way, and then we'll be able to share this out. This is a beef tataki dish, so I can tell you from Chef Ransley. There's a bit of chimichurri on the top there. There's some lumpfish caviar and an assortment of nasturtium leaves. You heard just a moment ago. I'll tell you what, I'm not sure we can wait for some plates. Grab a knife and fork there, dig in, have a little taste. And we need the honest appraisal here, winemaker Carl. So have a taste of the wine, and I'll top up as well, and see if you think that that this dish does justice to the majesty of the great Carl Schultz and his Shiraz.
No.
It's lovely wine. So there we go. Have a taste of the beef tataki, and see what you think.
Okay. Looks good. Beautiful.
I think I did have some a little earlier today, purely for research purposes, and it did work out rather nicely. There we go. Wonderful service here at the Old Oak.
Thank you.
All right, so that's a touch. It's the very, very, very lightly seared the tataki, bit of quite intense chimichurri. Chimichurri is often especially Argentinian style, a little light, a little more vinegary. This has got a bit of chunk to it. How do you think it pairs up with the Shiraz?
Whenever I find that wine with food has no jagged edges, that it's silky, seamless at the edges, and I reckon you're onto a good thing as far as pairing goes. The meat is, I'd say, rare. There's I think it's an aioli type sauce at the bottom. It has a slight tang and a spiciness. And the word spice is one of the famous descriptors for the grape.
Yeah.
So, of course, a second taste is a necessity.
You'd be very unprofessional if you didn't.
To refine one's opinion, as it were. And let's have a look. It's a beautiful mouthful. That's for sure.
All right. Well, I think we have got a thumbs up there. I can see Chef Ramsay on the horizon. Well done so far, Chef. Dish number 2 to go with the stork would be which one? The lamb with a stork. All right. So let's move on then to the stork. We've got some glasses of it poured.
Yeah.
I shall finish off that Shiraz, which is lovely. The stork will deposit our tataki. There we go. Thank you, restaurateur Ronaldo. Onto the stork. And you mentioned very briefly earlier the man who it's named after. I believe he was a big man with spindly legs, which is why the stork nickname came about. And also a famed fighter pilot.
That's right, yes. So like many South Africans in the time of the Second World War, they joined the cause on the British side and took the mail ship to Southampton and made it into the RAF. His squadron was assigned to North Africa, and he actually fought in the battle for Tobruk and was shot down in that battle. In his own voice, he says he bounced off the desert floor of times. And he spent 3 days in the desert. When he had been shot, he picked up shrapnel, and it was bleeding. And it was in a pretty bad way, but happily a British patrol came across him, and he lived to tell the tale. But the interesting thing is his fighter call sign was Stork. And because this bear of a man had these long, thin legs, he resembled the European stork. And the wine itself came about. Ken had passed away in 2003. And if one looks at the reasons why he bought the estate in 1986, it's because of his love for Shiraz. And the estate back then, obviously, was already on the map with the grape. And I wanted to do a tribute wine in his memory. I only knew him for a decade, but he certainly had a Mandela-like presence about him. Is the best way to describe him. He was just a font of knowledge. Just, you never saw him angry. The wisdom was amazing. He would arrive, and you'd see him talking to the gardening staff, and he could engage people. He instilled immense loyalty in his staff. He was just the type of person you wanted your son to be, for example. He was an exemplary individual, and I thought I need to make a really special Shiraz for him. And at that stage, all our Shiraz was planted on stone soil. We planted earlier this vineyard on deep clay loam soil, and spoke to his son-in-law James Brown, asked for direction on a name perhaps, and he then for the first time told me the story about Stork Mackenzie, and that was it. So this is the 2019 vintage. It's just been released. Happily, earlier this year, it for the fourth time was tasted and judged at the Shiraz du Monde, the world's biggest competition for the grape, and made it to the global top 10. Previous vintages of 08 and 07 have also made it. 2012 made it to the same rating.
That's an extraordinary accolade. Top 10 in the world.
Yeah, no, it's the world's biggest competition for Shiraz.
Yeah,
and they judge by country. And in week 2 of the judging, the great thing is it's French judges in France, so there can't be any finger pointing or allusions made after the fact. So, but I think we've had a number of South African wines that have done well in that platform, but at this specific evaluation, the wine has really found a niche. In actual fact, the 08 was the global #1, and it's also a Plateau 5-star and a Tim Atkin 95 pointer. It is a very flamboyant, showy, flashy style. It just jumps fruit out of the glass.
And it is wine that I suspect has inspired our chef. We are coming towards the end of the show. We've raced through the time. We've got 2 dishes to go through quickly, though. So the Stork, a top 10 in the Shiraz du Monde. What did Chef Ransley decide to pair with this one?
The Shiraz 2020, we've decided to do a slow-cooked lamb pasta. What makes this very unique is we start off the cooking process with tomato in a ragu style, and on service we finish it off with a touch of jus that we make from all the bones and stock from the lamb. This year has a slight less acidic qualities in the dish, and I think that pairs specifically well with the lamb. Little hints of fennel seeds and fresh fennel on top, as well as carrot tops and a slight minted labneh to finish it off.
All right, so this is a lamb ragu, as Ransley said, very little tomato to it. Often these dishes have got quite a lot of acid to them because the tomato coming through. So test number 2, Mr. Schultz, a quick taste of your aglio and your lamb and see what you think.
Thank you.
Take it away.
After my host.
No.
You sure?
I've had some of this for lunch. I know how good it is.
Okay.
So this is to go with the Stork.
This is my first taste, so maiden test. Beautiful flavor on the beef. Wow.
And you talk about this being flamboyant. There is a a richness and a showiness to the dish, not for the sake of it, but because it just wraps up that wintry comfort food that this is. This and a fire, and I think you got a pretty good evening.
I think this is a match made in heaven. This is beautiful.
Oh,
they're both very rich products, and I like the acidity, very subtle on the dish, but it's the flavor and the richness on the beef itself that
comes through.
That comes through very nicely.
All right. We are rushing to the end of the show, unfortunately, because we're almost at the top of the hour. So what I'm going to do, I've got one final one. I think this is going to cause a bit of a surprise with Carl. I'm going to jump straight back to Chef Ransley in the kitchen to tell you what he's produced for a wine that I've got a very special story about. I'll tell you that story in a moment. First of all, though, what's the Gravel Hill got from the kitchen? Chef Ransley has the answer.
For the Gravel Hill Syrah, we've decided to take a lot of inspiration from where the wine comes from the vineyard. So what we've decided to do is take the road less traveled, and we've decided to pair the Gravel Hill Syrah with, because it's a 2017 vintage, we find that the tannins are a lot more relaxed, the wine is showing beautifully, and what I've decided to pair with it is a very delicate curry with more fruit-driven flavors with tamarind addition in there. We tone down the curry flavors and the spiciness with an addition of a little bit of coconut cream, and we've done a lovely meaty piece of king clip with that, a slight touch of calabrese chili to add a little bit of complexity to the dish, as well as a cremolata tapioca puff that finishes it off.
So yes, you heard right, and no, the chef does not have a narcotics problem, at least not one that I know of. He has decided to pair white fish with red wine. Now, you mentioned a little earlier ago that we've discovered these new and what would initially be crazy, but now actually seem quite sensible pairings. You've got some king clip here. It's been done with some kind of slightly Indian spices to it, some deep fried curry leaves, a couple of reductions, Ransley's signature collection of flowers. His mum's garden is a wreck because he pillages it every day. So there we go. This is the one that I think really needs your seal of approval. Does the Gravel Hill. And while you have a taste, I know you know this story, but I'll remind people who might not remember it. You dig in there. But going back probably 6-7 years ago, I managed to find myself upgraded to first class based on good looks and youthful athleticism. And the two red wines in first class were 2001 Chateau Mouton Rothschild and a 2007 Gravel Hill. And in that kind of space, I judge the wines much like a parent who coaches their own child on a team judges the kid. You're extra hard and tough because you need to make a point. And I did that, and I still felt that the Mouton Rothschild came a very creditable second to the wine we drank that day. It was just a delight. And this Gravel Hill fan club that you have is immense. I know Ransley is a fan as well. It's a beautiful expression from this barren moonscape of a vineyard that you have that doesn't look like it can possibly make anything, let alone fine wine. It certainly does. Is it a fine wine that works with Ransley's King Clip with a touch of spice?
I think it does. This is the king clip is as a fish already is let's say some of the richer fish you can buy or eat, and it's also has this slightly curried sauce on the fish, which I think will certainly help. Gravel Hill, this vintage is 2017, and so has a 2-year advantage on Stork. It's already softened. And I, for example, think that Stork bread would perhaps not work with this dish because it's too youthful still. There's still an element of tannin, but you can see the Gravel Hill has started to settle. It's 6 years down the track, and it's from a very cool vintage. And in cooler vintages, tannins are generally less prominent, and the wines show greater elegance. So very clever, wonderful.
We'll have a happy chef, and in fact, we have a very happy chef. I'm going to bring him in now. He's got something small to deliver, and we can do another hour on this very happily. And I promise to come down and visit you soon, which I will. But from both Dan Really Likes Wine, but also the Old Oak, very excited to have you here today. Chef Ransley has just put together something very small you can take back to your hotel with you. Ransley, bring it in. 30 years at Hartenberg is worthy of the celebration. So here is a small cake. I don't want to begin to think what is in there, but there we go. 30 years of your time at Hartenberg, and yeah, there are far more worthy people than I to give you any kind of endorsement or thanks. But what you've done for South African wine has been astounding through the Guild, through Hartenberg, and through your love and passion for the industry. You've shared a snippet of with us today. Thank you for being a great friend of Dan Really Likes Wine, but far more importantly, thanks for being an extraordinary lieutenant within the South African wine industry.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words, and thanks, Chef. It's appreciated. And it's with humility I accept your beautiful little gift. Thank you.
Carl, thank you very much for being on the show. Much appreciated. And enjoy your cake. God knows what's in it, because the chef gets a little silly with things like this.
I'm inquisitive. I will discover shortly.
All right. Well, that wraps us up on the show for today. Huge thank you to Carl Schultz, Cape Winemakers Guild veteran of 27 years, winemaker at Hartenberg for 30, and one of the cornerstones of the South African winemaking industry. Wraps us up for this evening. I've got a large amount of wine from France and Spain to go and get through this evening's Tour de France themed dinner, which should be fun here at the Old Oak. Big thank you to Chef Ransley Peterson, conjuring up some wonders with his staff, as well as director/waiter Ronaldo Silvestri de Souza, who does such a magical job. Catch us next Monday. I'm going to be up at Leopard Creek, where I will have Mornay Duplessis, amongst others, on the show. The Rugby World Cup manager, the former Springbok captain, now makes some rather nice rosé. We'll find out why and what it tastes like from the bush on Monday. For now, I'm off to devour more food and wine with the Old Oak. Big thank you for joining us on the show. Don't forget to head over to the Dan Really Likes Wine store with Norman Goodfellows, where I think you might just find in the next month or two some older vintages from Hartenberg. Watch this space. That does it for now. Big thank you to Carl and the Hartenberg team. We'll see you on Monday. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Sure.